Okay, so you're here because you really want to understand things,
Yeah.
right? To get to the core of how things work without, getting bogged down in the details.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's what we're all about. And today we're going to be taking a deep dive into Michael Faraday.
Oh, wow.
Now, Faraday is a name that comes up all the time when we're talking about, the fundamental forces of nature. But what's so interesting about Faraday is not just, his discoveries, it's how he got there.
Right.
And so our mission today in this deep dive is to really explore Faraday's life as a powerful example of what our source material calls book-to-brain learnography.
Interesting.
And essentially what that means is how did he take what he read and transform that into this profound understanding and really revolutionary science?
Yeah.
And so our source highlights a few key things about this. One is this drive for self-learning. Another is this hands-on approach. They call this motor science.
Wow.
And then finally, this development of mental models of knowledge, or what they call brain pages. Yeah. So
Yeah.
let's see what we can learn from Faraday's journey through life.
All right. Let's dive in. I think this idea of book-to-brain learnography is a really cool way to kind of look at Faraday's life.
Yeah.
Because, I think we tend to think of big-time scientists as having, gone through all this formal education and stuff.
Right.
But Faraday's path was totally different. I mean, he started with very little formal schooling. And when he was 14, he actually became a bookbinder's apprentice.
Wow.
Which on the surface might seem like, what does that have to do with science?
Yeah. Exactly. Totally unrelated.
Right.
But as our source points out, this unexpected beginning was actually like the perfect setup.
Oh, yeah.
Because imagine being surrounded by books on every imaginable subject.
Yeah.
I mean, for someone who was as curious as Faraday,
Right.
that must have been like having access to like the world's biggest library. And that's where, this self-driven learning really took off for him. He wasn't just, binding those pages, he was absorbing them. He was devouring the information.
Yeah. He was consuming knowledge left and right.
But he wasn't just passively reading, right?
No, not at all. I mean, the source makes it really clear that he was super active in the way he was learning.
Right.
Like he didn't just, read the words. He would like try to picture the concepts. He would try to recreate the experiments in his head, or sometimes even for real.
Wow.
I mean, he was really engaged with the material.
Wow.
And this is actually a key part of what the source calls that motor-driven knowledge transfer.
Yeah.
It's like you're not just taking in information, you're like physically interacting with it to make it really stick.
So it's like having a conversation with the book almost.
Totally, yeah.
Yeah.
Like back and forth, you're trying to understand it.
Yeah. So then there's this idea of brain page maps and modules, and I'm curious, what are those?
Yeah. So the source talks about this idea of a brain page.
Yeah.
And it's essentially like you're creating this mental model in your mind.
Yeah.
And it's not just about memorizing facts and figures. It's about building this framework that you can actually understand and work with.
Oh, okay.
So it's almost like building a mental map.
Okay.
And the way Faraday did this was really interesting. Like, he would take all these complex ideas from the books he was reading,
Yeah.
the lectures he was going to. He was actually going to lectures by Humphrey Davy at the time,
Wow.
which is like one of the leading scientists of the day. And Faraday was just meticulously taking notes during these lectures.
Really?
But he wasn't just like, writing down what Davy was saying word for word. He was processing it. He was putting it into his own words.
Yeah.
He was essentially like creating his own textbook in his notes.
Mhm.
So it wasn't just about like regurgitating information. It was about understanding it and like making it his own.
And that's how he built those mental models.
Exactly. Yeah. He
Yeah.
was constantly building and refining these mental maps.
It's fascinating. And this really proactive approach, this really paid off for Faraday
Yeah, for sure.
because Davy actually took notice of him.
Right. He saw how dedicated he was.
Yeah.
He had all this self-acquired knowledge, and Davy was so impressed, he brought him on as an assistant at the Royal Institution.
Wow.
That's a huge deal.
Yeah.
And it's so cool to think about, like, he went from, reading about science to actually doing it
Yeah.
alongside one of the leading scientists of the time.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
And, this brings us to his groundbreaking discoveries,
Right.
like electromagnetic induction in 1831.
Yeah.
And our source makes it clear that this wasn't just some random lucky break.
Oh, way.
Right. This was the result of years of this active physical engagement with the principles that he had learned.
Right.
It wasn't just thinking about magnets and electricity. It was like physically manipulating them
Yeah.
and seeing what happened.
Seeing how they interacted.
Yeah.
Exactly. I mean, all those experiments he did with magnets and electric currents,
Yeah.
they weren't just him like passively observing. he was actively like poking and prodding, trying to figure out how they work together,
Right.
how they were related.
Yeah.
And this physical interaction, this is that motor-based learning, is like super important for how he made his discoveries.
Yeah.
It's kind of amazing to think about.
It is.
Like just by doing things with your hands,
Yeah.
you can actually change the way your brain works.
Right.
And you can learn things in a much deeper way than just by reading or listening to stuff.
Absolutely. And even his concept of field lines, which is like so fundamental to how we picture electromagnetism.
Right.
The source suggests that this didn't just come out of, abstract theory.
Yeah.
It came from him actually doing stuff, like seeing how iron filings arrange themselves around a magnet.
Right.
That's pretty amazing.
It's such a good illustration of how, like, when you actually get your hands dirty and do something,
Yeah.
you can have these original insights.
Right. Absolutely.
Like, things just click in a different way,
Yeah.
And
that's what the source calls that motor-driven knowledge transfer.
yeah, that hands-on learning, it sticks with you.
Yeah.
It's not just something you memorize, it's something you actually experience.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So the source mentions this thing called the Geinpith experience, and it describes this as like a deep dive into knowledge that leads to real expertise
Oh, yeah.
through self-directed actions. And it seems like Faraday's life is like a perfect example of this.
Totally. I mean, this guy, he wasn't sitting around waiting for someone to tell him what to learn next.
Right.
He was driven by his own curiosity.
Yeah.
Like, he took charge of his education, he followed his own questions.
Yeah.
And he just went for it
Yeah.
with all those experiments and, his reading. And I think it's a really cool testament to the idea that, if you really want to master something, you got to be willing to do the work yourself.
Exactly. You got to go after it. And a key part of this Geinpith experience, according to the source, is book power.
Which is the ability to take information from a book, from those printed words.
Yeah.
And transform it into like a working brain page.
Yeah.
Through deliberate action.
Exactly. Like for Faraday, reading wasn't the end goal. It was just the starting point.
Right.
Right. It was like the fuel for his experiments. And his discoveries, they didn't come from sitting in a lecture hall. They came from this constant back and forth of reading something, questioning it, testing it out to see if it was true, and then refining his understanding. Yeah. It was like a loop.
Yeah.
Right. Of learning by doing.
So we've been looking at Faraday's life, through this lens of book-to-brain learnography.
Right.
What are some of the key takeaways for us today? Like, how can we use these principles to learn new things? Whether it's like, trying to master a new skill or just trying to understand the world better.
Yeah. That's the big question, right? Like, how do we apply this to our lives?
Yeah. And what really strikes me is the difference between Faraday's approach, so active.
Yeah.
Self-driven. And the way a lot of us learn in, formal settings. Which can be a lot more passive.
Right. You're just sitting there receiving information.
Yeah. Just kind of absorbing it, hoping it sticks.
Yeah.
But the source actually mentions this other model, the Taxshila model of learnography.
Okay.
And it's very similar to what Faraday was doing. It's all about that self-directed learning.
Yeah.
Building those mental models.
Yeah.
Getting that hands-on experience. And I think for you listening, if you want to really grasp these new ideas without feeling overwhelmed.
Right.
Faraday's life is a really cool example of how to do that.
Yeah, it's a great model.
It's like a blueprint for taking control of your own education.
It really is a great reminder that, understanding something isn't just about memorizing a bunch of facts. It's about actually engaging with those facts.
Yeah.
Questioning them, finding ways to apply them in the real world.
Totally. You got to make it real.
Yeah.
And the source really drives home this point that like significant learning,
Yeah.
Whether it leads to these like amazing discoveries or just a deeper understanding of yourself, it comes from this mix of curiosity, persistence, and turning information into action.
Exactly. And it really emphasizes the idea that learning isn't something that's done to you. It's something that you actively do.
Yeah.
And Faraday's story is so inspiring in that way.
Yeah.
Because it shows what's possible when you take control of your own learning journey.
For sure. It's empowering.
Absolutely. So just to kind of sum up here, Faraday's life is like this powerful demonstration of self-driven learning.
Yeah.
And how important it is to actively engage with books and other sources of information.
Yeah.
And that hands-on experimentation can have a huge impact on your ability to understand things and make new discoveries.
Right.
And it all comes back to this idea of book-to-brain learnography.
Which I love. I think it's a great way to think about learning. And it raises a question for you, the listener.
Oh, yeah.
How can you take these principles of self-driven learning and active engagement and use them in your own life?
Yeah. How can you apply them to the things you're interested in and the knowledge that you want to gain?
Because the source is really challenging us to embrace the power of book-to-brain learnography by transforming what you read into practical understanding.
I like that. So think about it this way. Start today. Pick up a book. Actively try to remember what you're learning. Build those mental models, those brain pages,
Yeah.
and look for opportunities to actually use that knowledge in the real world.
Put it into practice.
Yeah, exactly. And be curious, ask questions, explore the ideas that really excite you,
Yeah.
and see if you can turn that curiosity into real-world exploration.
Like go on your own learning adventure.
Exactly. And most importantly, take charge. Don't wait for someone to teach you. Be the architect of your own learning journey.
I love that. That's such a good point. Don't wait for permission to learn. Just go for it. And ultimately, as the source puts it so well, unlock your potential through this active, hands-on approach to learning. Because the next big insight, whatever field you're passionate about it, starts with you.
That's a great way to put it.
Thanks.
It does all start with you. So go out there and learn something new today.
And make it your own.
Yeah, make it your own. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.